The Crown Season 1 Recap. Episodes 1. Wolferton Splash. Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark renounces his titles and citizenship and takes the name Philip Mountbatten before marrying Princess Elizabeth, eldest daughter and heir presumptive of King George VI. The newlyweds take up residence in Malta, where Philip rises through the ranks of the Royal Navy while Elizabeth gives birth to their son Charles and their daughter Anne. Years later, the family returns to London to be with George as he undergoes a lung operation. George receives a terminal diagnosis, prompting him to confide in newly re-elected Conservative Prime Minister Winston Churchill and counsel Philip on how to assist Elizabeth when she becomes the new sovereign. Episodes 2. Hyde Park Corner. With George in ill health, Elizabeth and Philip tour the Commonwealth in his place, making their first stop in Nairobi, Kenya. Several cabinet members express growing concerns over Churchill's ability to govern, prompting Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Secretary Anthony Eden to ask George if he can persuade Churchill to step down. George declines, stating that Churchill will step down when the right time comes. After an evening spent singing with youngest daughter Margaret and watching a news report on Elizabeth and Philip's arrival in Kenya, George dies in his sleep. News spreads around the world after his body is discovered the following morning. Elizabeth and Philip return to London, where Elizabeth assumes the role of sovereign. Episodes 3. Windsor. On the 10th of December 1936, Edward VIII, George's elder brother and predecessor, abdicates the throne to marry twice-divorced American socialite Wallis Simpson. Despite protests from Queen Mary, Edward makes a radio broadcast from Windsor Castle, informing the British people of his reasons for abdicating before declaring his allegiance for George. In the present, amidst preparations for George's funeral, Edward re-enters the country for the first time in nearly 20 years. With Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother expressing anger at how his actions caused irreparable damage to the monarchy. Elizabeth meets Churchill to discuss Philip's requests to let Charles and keep the Mountbatten surname and let the family continue living at Clarence House rather than move into Buckingham Palace. Churchill is reluctant to agree, and Elizabeth drops both matters after receiving counsel from Edward. She later learns her coronation has been set for the following year, recognizing it as a deliberate move by Churchill to secure his position within the Conservative Party. Philip approaches Peter Townsend, George's former equerry, and convinces him to give flying lessons, unaware that Townsend is having an affair with Margaret. Episodes 4. Act of God. On the 5th of December 1952, a great smog forms over London, reducing visibility, killing thousands, and hospitalizing thousands more over the course of several days. Elizabeth's advisors pressure her to ask Churchill, who refers to the event as an act of God, to step down. Reluctant, Elizabeth summons him for a private audience after he has come under fire for refusing to discuss the smog at cabinet. Beforehand, Churchill has learned that his secretary, Venetia Scott, was killed by a double-decker bus. He later makes an impassioned speech, promising a longer-term approach to prevent future smog. Both the speech and the smog's sudden disappearance prompt Elizabeth to change her mind as Churchill arrives at the palace. Having colluded with Downing Street staff to use the crisis to attempt to open a vote of no confidence in Churchill, Clement Attlee dejectedly learns of the Queen's change of heart. Episodes 5. Smoke and Mirrors. On the 11th of May 1937, Elizabeth helps her father rehearse for his coronation. In the present, while visiting London to spend time with an ailing Queen Mary, Edward clashes with Private Secretary Tommy Lascelles after learning that he and Wallis are not invited to attend the coronation. Elizabeth regrets her decision to place Philip in charge of preparations after he upsets her with a request that he should forego kneeling to pay homage when she is crowned and irritates the committee by insisting that they televise the event. On the 2nd of June 1953, Elizabeth is crowned at Westminster Abbey while Edward and Wallis mockingly view the coverage from their Paris villa. Eventually, Wallace watches as Edward tearfully plays the bagpipes outside. Episode 6. Gelignite. When Margaret and Townsend ask to get married, Elizabeth promises her support, while Lascelles and the Queen Mother advise against it. A newspaper publishes an article about their relationship and, after learning that the Royal Marriages Act of 1772 prohibits Margaret from marrying without permission until she turns 25, Elizabeth changes her mind. Elizabeth and Philip take Townsend, who is set to be posted to Brussels, with them on a trip to Northern Ireland, but his sudden popularity causes Lascelles to recommend he be posted sooner than promised. Episode 7. Scientia Potentia Estate. In August 1953, after discovering that the Soviet Union has tested their first thermonuclear weapon, Churchill urges an international summit with American President Eisenhower. At the last minute, Churchill suffers a stroke, which inhibits his ability to govern and prompts Lord Salisbury to keep his ailment secret. Meanwhile, Elizabeth chooses to replace the retiring Lascelles with Senior Deputy Michael Adine, after Lascelles strongly disapproves of her preferred choice of Martin Charteris. Realizing that she did not receive a proper education growing up as a princess, she engages a private tutor to improve her studies, which helps her gain the courage to dress down both Churchill and Salisbury after Jock Colville accidentally reveals their deception. Episodes 8. Pride and Joy. With Elizabeth and Philip touring the Commonwealth, Margaret takes on more engagements while the Queen Mother travels to Scotland to reflect on her new position, and buys a castle. Philip grows frustrated with Elizabeth using him as a prop, resulting in a confrontation that is recorded by photographers. While Elizabeth convinces them to surrender their recordings, she and Philip are unable to resolve their argument. Churchill visits Margaret and refuses to let her continue taking on engagements, saying that the British people do not want someone with passion or personality. Episodes 9. Assassins. Philip begins spending more time away from the palace while Elizabeth begins spending time with her horse racing manager and friend Lord Porchester. Tension escalates after Elizabeth orders a direct line to be installed for Portia. Elizabeth later tells Philip that he is the only man she has ever loved, prompting him to mouth an apology after she makes a speech at Churchill's 80th birthday dinner. Churchill meets with artist Graham Sutherland after Parliament commissions him to paint a birthday portrait. Upon receiving the portrait, Churchill confronts Sutherland about its accuracy, eventually admitting his pain at what aging has done to him. Churchill resigns and requests that Eden replace him as Prime Minister, while Clementine orders that the portrait be destroyed. Episodes 10. Gloriana. Elizabeth finds herself torn when the country is divided over Margaret's relationship with Townsend, with the public approving and officials from Parliament and the Church disapproving. Following advice from Edward, Elizabeth forbids a devastated Margaret from marrying Townsend, who then departs for Brussels. The Queen Mother complains about Philip's domineering attitude towards Charles. Lascelles and the Queen Mother suggest that Elizabeth ask Philip to open the Summer Olympics in Melbourne so that he can adjust to life in her shadow. A 5-month royal tour is later added to the itinerary, with Elizabeth suggesting he be thankful that everyone is helping him find a public role. Eden replaces Churchill as Prime Minister and becomes trapped in an escalating dispute with Egyptian President Nasser over the rights to the Suez Canal. The end. Please subscribe my YouTube channel Teddy's Best Story Time. See you next time.